Hi, I'm James Lehman, author of the Total Transformation Program. Over the years, one of the primary questions that I've gotten from parents is how to use consequences effectively. You know, often we say that kids need to be held accountable for their behavior and that we need to set limits on kids, and also we can use things to motivate kids. And consequences should be effective in those three areas. They set limits, they motivate, and they hold responsible the individual kid. And during this video, I'm going to talk more about how we set consequences, what our theory is about consequences, like how we want them to be effective and what we want the kid to get out of it, and also how parents can learn to use different consequences effectively so that when they're stuck in situations that often happen with kids, they have other options and other ways out. Let's talk a minute about what consequences are and what they're designed to accomplish and what they're not. Let's start with the premise that you can't punish people into good behavior. If that were so, we'd have very well-behaved schools and very well-behaved families, and we wouldn't have much trouble because parents are pretty good at punishment, you know, and they come up with punishments. Unfortunately, those punishments don't work. And they don't work because they don't have a learning experience built into them. If a parent is retaliatory by yelling or screaming or cursing or laying out some severe punishment, you know, that happens sometimes. Parents fall into those traps. Certainly, it gets so frustrating when dealing with kids with the same issues over and over that it's easy to want to retaliate and it's easy to want to punish. But the problem with that is that it's not effective. That retaliation and punishment doesn't help the situation. It doesn't change the behavior. In fact, there's studies that show that it deepens it. You know, that the kid gets resentful, that the kid gets angrier. And so there's no motivation on him to change his behavior. In fact, the whole idea of punishment and retaliation is the concept that I make that kid feel smaller to show him how powerful I am. And we know with kids, if they feel powerless, they do things to be more powerful too. Like do things to spite you or get in your face or raise their voice or curse at you or go break something in the home or don't respond to you. All right, so we know that kids don't respond to the feeling of powerlessness the way parents think they do or would like them to. So the idea is not to make that kid feel powerless by retaliating or by being over-punishing. The idea is to give a consequence for the judgment that led to the behavior, with the idea that the kid is going to learn from the consequence not to do that again, but also the consequence is going to teach him how not to do it again, that there's something attached to it. You know, a punishment is just bing, don't do it again. A consequence should be, don't do it again, and here's how. Here's how I'm going to help you learn this, or here's what you can do about it, or here's how you can make it better. And it's a very important part of a consequence that you construct it, you think of it, about a learning experience. What do I want this child to learn? You know, this child isn't doing his homework. What do I want him to learn? All right, and how am I going to get him to learn that? Well, I want him to learn the importance of doing his homework. Well, how do I do that? Well, I make it important to him. Right now, his homework's important to me, but it's not important to him. So I make it important to him. How do I do that? Well, I take something else that's important to him and I connect it to the homework. So if his phone is important to him, then he earns his phone by doing his homework. All right? If video is important to him, then he does his video after he gets his homework done. And the homework is checked by me, the parent, to make sure that it's done in you know, a reasonably coherent and neat way. And it's not just some slop he throws down on paper to kid me as a parent or himself or his teacher that he got something done. So what we do is we take things that are important to that child and we pair them, we hook them up with the thing that's important to us. And look, isn't that the way your own job works? I mean, money is important to us because it pays for things. And so, you know, the employer pairs that money with the things he wants us to do. And not only that, he usually pairs it up with money by the hour so that it's managed in these discrete little steps. I get paid by the hour. If I put in an extra hour, I get more money. That's very important because my employer doesn't pay me by the month. And so when we ground kids for a month, or we take their phone for a week, we're really losing our currency. Don't forget, that phone is your money. That phone is what the kid works for. That video game is what he works for. That time on Saturday night out with his friend is what the teen works for. This is what they're working for. This is what they value. So that's what we have to pair up. We should look at every 3 hours of phone use as $1. Okay, so if the kid doesn't do something, we take $1. You can't use the phone for the next 3 hours, all right? That way the kid, has a goal then, all right? The way that I like to do that is you can't use your phone until you don't curse for 3 hours. Give me your phone. You can't use your phone until you spend an hour at the homework. Let me have the phone. And so that way it's very connected to the task on hand. Don't forget, we want consequences to be task-oriented, not time-oriented. If you ground a kid for 30 days, that kid is just doing time. What does he learn? Really nothing. That it's important to be sneakier. It's important to fool you better. But if he's grounded until he accomplishes certain tasks, until he brings his grades up to a B again, until he goes to after-school practice like he made the commitment to. We want this kid to accomplish tasks. The reason for that is that the part of the kid's brain that is accomplishing tasks is growing. So not only am I lost my phone until I don't curse for 3 hours, but the part of my brain that screens out the cursing is doing push-ups during that time. It's getting stronger. I'm using that part of my brain. And the more we get kids to use certain parts of their brain, the stronger those parts of their brain get. It's very important to understand why we want kids to learn how to solve problems, why we want kids to learn how to accomplish things, why we want kids to learn that there are certain consequences in life and that there are certain tasks that those consequences imply. When we think about constructing a consequence, I think we ought to look at what we have available to us to hold kids accountable. And we ought to develop and be creative about a menu of consequences. So on this menu, we don't have take the phone. We have take the phone for an hour, take the phone for the rest of the night, take the phone for 24 hours, take the phone for 2 days, take the phone for 3 days. I think 3 days is a maximum. I think that after 3 days, the kid becomes desensitized. Go to bed an hour early, lights out an hour early. When I say going to bed, I mean no video games in the room, no electronics. You can read if you want, but that's it. You're in your room, reading in quiet time. Going to bed an hour early, going to bed after dinner. If I tell you a consequence should be to take the phone away from an hour, don't get fooled by the kid who says, I bought the phone myself. All right, it's not his phone. You're signed on that service. He can't use that phone without your permission. You make it really clear. If you don't give up that phone now, tomorrow I'm shutting it off until you agree to surrender it and work this through with me. You call a phone company, believe me, as the adult, if you shut it off, it's getting shut off. And I've heard adults tell me that they call a phone company and shut it off for 3 days and the phone company goes along with it. They just shut off the service for 3 days. They shut down the service. They tell them why. It's not take video games for a week. It's take no video games till bedtime. No video games for the rest of the night. No video games till after dinner. No video games till your homework is done. Supplement that out. I suggest parents have a certain limit of video games that they allow kids to play anyway, so that there's an hour a night or an hour and a half a night that's your free time. And on your free time, if you choose to use that video game, that's fine. But any extra, you're going to have to earn. Parents should have a structure in their home at night that says this is free time, this is chore time, this is homework time, this is get ready for bedtime, and to have it kind of organized in a general way like that. Many parents will say, oh, that's too rigid. But those are the parents that don't need it, all right? If you're having trouble getting your kids to do their chores, to clean their rooms, to do their homework, to take time for dinner, that's because you need to structure it more. Not every family needs the same structural setup, but there are a lot of families dealing with kids who have problematic behaviors, who need structure so that everybody's got something to relate to and everybody's got a schedule to be accountable to. In a Total Transformation program, I teach parents a technique called the alternative response. And it's a guided interview in which they discuss problems with their kids in a non-emotional, hopefully constructive way. And part of the alternative response, you come to a point where you're asking the child, what are you going to do to make amends for this? Because I'm sorry is not an amends. And I want to think about amends. You know, the word amends in a dictionary means right the wrong, make better. And I think that we want to think about kids who do abusive things, who violate other people's privacy or violate other people's property, on how are they going to right that wrong? You know, many of these kids, when they apologize, they say, I'm sorry, but, and there's a blank. And you can listen for it. And it usually is, I'm sorry, but it was your fault. You know, I'm sorry, but he was looking at me. I'm sorry, but he said that. I'm sorry, but this. I'm sorry, but that. And that's really not saying I'm sorry. That's saying I wouldn't have done it if you didn't push me. So I'm sorry is not enough. And in fact, it's okay to say I'm sorry, but what we really want is for kids to make amends for the wrongs they've done others and make that part of the consequence process. If you don't do your chore, all right, before mom gets home and your brother does it, when mom comes home and she discovers that, I think what you have to do is figure out how, not only what went wrong, but also how the kid is going to make up for it to his brother who had to do his chore. I mean, it's like if somebody has to set the table, then you get his brother to do it because he's refusing right now. He's acting out. Well, how do you pay that back? Because it's not only I'm sorry, because the kid got out of setting the table. And really, you don't ever want kids to get out of responsibilities by acting out. They should always come back and make it better. They should always do something that's going to make it right. Again, not overdo it, not overmake it, just make it right. And I think it's important for kids to learn how to right the wrongs because, you know, that's how adult life is. If I say I'm sorry, that's not enough for people. They want to know what I'm going to do about it. If I make a mistake at my job, my bosses want to know, what am I going to do to change it next time? What am I going to do differently? And then how am I going to make it better? And how am I going to fix it? And I think we should start teaching kids that very early in life. So, because that's part of the problem solving, you know, process is figuring out what I did wrong and then what I can do to make it better. Again, our job is to teach kids how to solve complex social problems of how to get along, how to treat other people, how to be treated, how to meet responsibilities, and the amends is a solid part of that process. In a Total Transformation program, we talk about the difference between effective parents and ineffective parents, and how effective parents operate in a way that their kids learn how to solve problems, and that their kids learn how to move on and keep moving ahead in their problem-solving skills, and that they can deal with social situations successfully, and that they learn how to respond to limits appropriately. And then we talk about ineffective parenting. And the thing about ineffective parenting is that kids, not only is the parenting ineffective, but kids learn ineffective things as a result of it. And I look at consequences the same way, you know. There's ineffective consequences and there's effective consequences. And kids learn from effective consequences, and kids also learn from ineffective consequences. But of course, what they learn from ineffective consequences is the wrong lesson. You know, it's often how to mimic and mirror the parent who's overreacting or yelling. You know, that stuff isn't effective. It happens. We're not talking about parents being saints. We're talking about parents being effective. So yelling happens, bitterness happens, punishment happens, people lose their temper, people yell, people react, people overreact, people double and triple consequences, but none of that's really effective. It may make you feel better at the moment. You know, parents deal with a lot of frustration when the kids come home late at night for the 5th time, or they won't clean their room, or they keep getting notes from school saying the homework's not done and the kid's lying to them and saying it's done. That's very frustrating as a parent. You can't yell at the kid and be effective at the same time. You can yell at the kid, then go away. But when you come back, you better have an effective plan, because that's the only thing that's going to help that kid change. Yelling has never changed anybody. Punishment has never changed anybody. It just doesn't happen that way. It's consequences that you learn from. Things that are a consequence of your bad choice or of your good choice. And then you learn from each of those. Because parents learn better from visual aids, what I'm going to do is show you some ineffective role plays and some effective role plays. And at each one, I'll lead the discussion on what was helpful and what was not helpful, what was effective and what was not effective in the parent-child interaction. You know, in these role plays, you may see yourself, you may see your kids, but that's okay, because we're here to critique ourselves and look at ourselves so that we become more effective parents. Let's begin by looking at one of the most common behaviors that parents have to deal with: adolescents not coming home on curfew.
Jenna?
I know. I can't believe she said that.
Jenna, you're an hour late.
I'm gonna need to call you back. Okay, bye. What?
I told you to be home at 9 o'clock. It's after 10.
The movie ran late and Sarah had to bring Melissa home first.
I don't care. You need to get dropped off first.
Whatever.
You are going to learn to come home on time once and for all. I am sick and tired of you coming home late. 30 days, you come straight home after school.
Are you kidding me?
No yearbook, no basketball, no friend's house. You come straight home after school.
I hate it here.
Maybe you saw yourself in that role play. Maybe you saw your kids. That's a behavior and a conflict that parents have all the time, all across the country. And what we saw was not bad parenting, but what we saw was ineffective parenting, using consequences ineffectively. She had an hour to think about this kid's coming home late. And she used that hour to stew and take it personally and get frustrated and angry. She could have used that hour planning how she was going to teach the kid to come home on time, and what would teach the kid that? Look, grounding kids from after-school activities for a month doesn't teach them anything. And in fact, we want kids involved with the yearbook. We want them involved with sports. That doesn't help them. Certainly, it makes them feel like we're in control and powerful. It gives us that feeling for just a second. But really, if that kid comes home right after school, what's gained? What is she going to do there? We want a parent to think more clearly about what's going to help this kid learn, and also what fits the crime, what consequence fits the mistake. I mean, here you have a mistake, a kid is an hour late. She's not complying with the limits that was set on her. Kids do that. How can we have a consequence that fits that particular behavior, doesn't go way overboard, and motivates that kid to solve that problem differently the next time?
Jenna?
I know. That was so lame.
Jenna, you're an hour late.
I'm gonna need to call you back. Okay, bye. What?
I told you to be home at 9. It's after 10 o'clock.
The movie ran late and Sarah had to bring Melissa home first.
You know the rules here. You need to plan it a little bit differently. You need to get dropped off first. Now, you were an hour late tonight, and so next Friday, if you